Snow had a way of silencing the prairie, swallowing sound until all that remained was breath and boot fall. It blanketed the world in hush and hush alone, as if even God had stopped speaking for a spell. Josiah Boone knew this silence well. He had walked through it for years ever, since he laid his firstborn beneath the earth and left the war behind him. Some silences you earned, others you endured. His coat was heavy with frost, the hem stiff as bone. As he moved along the creek, the wind moaned through frozen cottonwoods like a widow too tired to wail. He was checking his traps, mostly out of habit now. There weren't many rabbits left that hadn't gone to ground, but it gave his hand something to do. Then it came, a sound that didn't belong to wind or bird. Thin, ragged, almost human. He stilled, heart thudding once like a drum in a funeral cart. His ears tilted forward, old soldier instinct kicking in. Another whimper followed, high-pitched and torn like a hymn off key. He followed it, his boots crunching over snow crust, past a half-rotted fence line, down into a gulch where the wind died altogether. And there it was, a wagon, shattered and leaned like a broken jawbone against a boulder. The canvas had caved in, snow layering it like burial cloth. Horses long gone. No sign of tracks, just wind-carved drifts and the bare bones of wheel ruts. The sound came again inside. He approached slow, breath visible, fingers on the grip of his rifle, though his gut said different. This wasn't danger. This was desperation. He peeled back the canvas. Four children, huddled like pups in a den, eyes too wide for their faces. No shoes, blue lips. The oldest couldn't have been more than 10. The youngest, still wet-eyed with toddler sleep. None spoke. None moved. Only the girl, the one with dark blonde hair, and a stare sharp as Flint lifted her chin. She looked at him like she'd already buried 2 men that week and wasn't afraid to make it 3. But Josiah only whispered, "You're all right now." Though he wasn't sure they were. Etta Boone opened the door before he knocked. She had flour on her hands and a line between her brows that said she'd felt the wind shift from the moment he left. Her eyes went from his face to the bundle in his armsa, a boy maybe 3 winters old, wrapped in Josiah's own coat, then to the 3 trailing behind him like ghosts stitched in calico. She didn't ask questions, just moved aside. The cabin was warm but not wide. A single room with 2 beds, a potbelly stove, and a table Josiah carved with his own hands. The air smelled of beans and sage, and the last of Etta's blackberry preserves simmering low. Etta took the smallest child first. Her hands were sure, gentle, as she peeled back rags and checked for frostbite. No words passed between them. None were needed. That night, the children didn't cry. Not even the baby. They just sat near the fire, wrapped in wool and wonder, as Josiah and Etta moved around them like shadows. Etta ladled stew without asking names. Josiah fetched blankets from the trunk. It was like living beside ghosts. When the wind howled again, one of the girls flinched. Etta didn't say a word. She just took her Bible down from the shelf, opened it to Psalms, and read aloud in a voice soft as lamplight. He healeth the broken in heart, and bindeth up their wounds. Only her eyes betrayed her fixed on the middle distance, as if remembering the boy she'd once wrapped in quilts who never woke come spring. Morning came pale and reluctant. The prairie glittered with ice like it was trying to dress its scars. Josiah stood outside, hands deep in his coat, watching the chimney smoke rise. He didn't know what to do with 4 children. He'd known how to load a musket at 15, to march until his feet bled, to dig trenches and bury friends without flinching. But this was different. Etta came out, her hair pinned up beneath a wool cap. She didn't speak until she stood beside him. "They won't last long like this," she said. "I know. They need shoes. Medicine." He nodded. "And someone will notice." He nodded again, slower this time, because in town, black folks didn't go unnoticed, especially not ones who suddenly had white children sharing their fire. By the 3rd day, Ruthie, the girl with the chin like iron, spoke. "My mama told us to hide," she said flatly. Etta didn't press, just poured her another ladle of stew. She said the men might come back. Josiah exchanged a glance with Etta. "She didn't wake up," Ruthie added. Her voice didn't crack, That was the worst part. No one asked where her mother lay now. Some things you already knew. That night, Josiah found Caleb barefoot and half asleep, curled at the edge of his bed, clutching his boot like it was a lifeline. He didn't have the heart to move him. He just pulled up a blanket and sat by the fire till morning. Word traveled like frost across a windowpane, slow, but spreading. At the general store, Josiah felt it first. A hush when he entered, the kind that sharpened backs and twisted mouths. The shopkeep, Mr. Flanders, gave him a look like a man eyeing a loaded pistol left on a pew. Got a lot of mouths to feed these days, Boone, he said, folding his arms. Josiah didn't answer, just laid down coin for sugar and quinine. Flanders sniffed. You and your wife decide to run a charity. Josiah met his eye. Just feeding children, he said. Humph, Flanders muttered. Folks'll talk. They always do. On the walk back, the wind pushed hard against him, like it wanted him to go back where he came from. But there was nowhere left to go. The moment came quietly, like most reckonings. Etta stood at the well outside the church, her scarf pulled tight against the wind. She waited her turn as Mrs. Whitmore finished, filling her pail. The white woman turned, saw Etta, and stopped. She narrowed her eyes, looked down the lane, where the children were playing near the fence. I heard what you and your husband done. Etta didn't respond. Ain't your place. They're not yours. Etta's voice was steady. No, they're not. Mrs. Whitmore sneered. Then why act like they are? Etta didn't answer. Just reached for the rope, pulled the bucket up hand over hand. Her arms shook, not from cold but from memory. She filled her pail, turned, walked away. Sometimes silence is louder than any fight. 1 week passed, then another. Slowly, the children began to breathe differently. Ruthie slept through the night. Micah started helping Josiah split kindling, his hands small but eager. Ellie clung to Etta's skirts, coughing but alive. And Caleb the baby started humming to himself. Nonsense tunes that meant he was safe enough to sing again. Inside the cabin, things shifted in small ways. Etta left warm tea by Josiah's chair without a word. He mended the leg of her spindle without being asked. They never said what they were doing becoming a family, but it was there, in the air between them, like smoke after a long burn. But the silence of the prairie was changing. It wasn't the hush of grief anymore. It was the pause before a question. What happens now? Snow fell again. Heavy this time. Thicker. The kind that meant spring wasn't coming anytime soon. Josiah stood on the porch, watching it blanket the world again. Behind him, he heard laughter, light and startling. The children playing some invented game with spoons and twine. And Etta, humming low. He thought about what the pastor would say when he came, what the law might do, what strangers might try. He thought about blood, about names. And then he thought about Ruthie, watching him with flint in her stare, about Micah looking up when he taught him to hold an axe, about Etta brushing Ellie's hair with a gentleness the world never showed them. They weren't his, but maybe they were. He turned, went back inside. Tomorrow would come. But tonight the fire was warm. The storm could wait. The snow didn't stop falling, it only changed shape. Sometimes it floated like breath, soft and weightless. Other times it fell hard, like regret. Days blurred into one another. Boots dried by the stove. Mittens hung in rows. The cold outside sharpened every sound inside every spoon against tin. Every cough in the night. Every whisper not meant to be heard. The children had stopped flinching at door hinges and raised voices, but they hadn't begun trusting yet. Trust, like thaw, took time. Josiah split logs in the early gray light, while Micah watched from the steps, small hands curled in sleeves too long for him. He didn't speak much, but Josiah could feel the boy's eyes tracking each swing of the axe, the kind of attention that came from someone who'd had to listen to survive. Josiah didn't offer lessons. He just placed the axe down beside the boy and walked away. Inside, Etta had begun to hum again. She wasn't aware of it. Not fully, it was something that lived in her bones. Low melodies from her mother's side, the kind that could stir butter or rock a baby to sleep. She didn't sing for the children, not yet, but she sang near them. That was enough. Ruthie, the oldest, still watched her like a caged hawk, sharp and unblinking. She never cried, never begged. She refused more food than she accepted, and she always made sure Caleb ate before she did. One morning, while folding laundry near the fire, Etta heard Ruthie speak. "You're not my mama." The words were flat, not cruel, just truth. Etta didn't stop folding. "No," she said. "I'm not." Ruthie waited for more, for anger or denial or pleading. But Etta gave none of that, only continued her quiet work, as if the statement needed no defense. That night, Etta left a pair of hand-stitched socks on Ruthie's bed. They were too big, but warm. Ruthie said nothing, but the next day, she wore them. Josiah came in with frost in his beard and wood stacked in his arms. Etta met him at the door and helped him unload, without a word. Their marriage had grown quieter over the years, not colder, but still, like a pond that didn't ripple unless you threw something heavy into it. He looked at her a long moment, then nodded toward the back room, where Ellie was sleeping again, breath wheezy, cheeks flushed. "She's not mending." "I know. Quinine ain't working." "No." He pulled his gloves off slowly. "We might need help." Etta stiffened. "Help from who?" Josiah didn't answer, because the only one who could help was the Lakota woman 3 ridges east, someone the town would rather forget, someone folks called a witch when it suited them and a healer when it didn't. Etta said nothing, just began gathering herbs and dried apples into a cloth. By dawn, she was already on the trail, her steps sure despite the snow. While she was gone, Josiah found Micah in the barn. The boy was holding the axe again, not swinging it, just holding it, like it might protect him from the memory of things he couldn't say. Josiah walked past him, picked up a branch, and began to whittle. He said nothing for an hour, then quietly handed Micah the piece smoothed into the shape of a horse. Micah didn't smile, but he held it with both hands like it was something holy. That night, Josiah placed another carved horse on the mantel, a second one beside it, smaller. By spring, there'd be 4. Etta returned with bitter-smelling tea and instructions that didn't come from any book. She boiled roots and wrapped Ellie in warm cloth. She whispered prayers between sips, not the kind she found in psalms, but the older kind, the ones her grandmother used to say, into cornfields. The fever broke at midnight. Ellie's eyes fluttered open and found Etta's face first. "You sing good," she rasped. Etta's throat closed. She hadn't realized she'd been humming again. The next day, a knock came at the door. It was the pastor, Reverend Halford, too clean for a man of faith, too polite to be trusted. He stepped in without waiting for an invitation, his eyes scanning the cabin like a ledger. "Quite the congregation you've gathered here," he said. Josiah said nothing. He knew better than to invite debate into his home. Reverend Halford continued, hands clasped in mock sorrow. "Brother Josiah, Sister Etta, you've always been upstanding. But this," he gestured toward the children playing near the hearth, "this isn't natural." Etta straightened her shoulders. "What's unnatural is leaving children to die." He ignored her. "There are rules. Courts. Kin. Blood." Josiah stepped forward. "They have kin." Reverend Halford hesitated. "They may. Somewhere. Then let them come. And if they don't?" Josiah held the man's gaze. "Then they stay." The Reverend looked ready to say more, but thought better of it. He tipped his hat with all the grace of a snake and stepped back into the snow. That night, Josiah lit an extra fire in the hearth and sharpened his knives, just in case. Trust came slowly. Micah began feeding the chickens without being asked. Caleb started calling Etta Mama in his sleep, though he didn't know it. And Ruthie? Ruthie left a scrap of cloth on Etta's pillow, a lopsided star she tried to sew, the needle still caught in its side. When Etta unfolded it, her hands trembled. She didn't say a word. She just tucked it into the pages of her Bible like a pressed flower. One evening, Josiah caught Ruthie standing by the window, staring out toward the prairie. "Waiting for someone?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just don't like the dark." "Why not?" "Because it always took things." He didn't press. Instead, he walked to the shelf, took down the lantern, and handed it to her. "You hold it," he said. "Tonight, you keep the dark away." And so she did, sitting beside the window, fingers tight around the handle, light flickering on her face. Days passed. Then a week. Ruthie laughed once sharp and startled, like it surprised her own throat. Micah said, "Thank you," after a bowl of stew. Ellie began drawing again. Tiny chalk sketches of trees and horses, and a tall man with a big hat. Caleb followed Josiah everywhere now, tugging at his coat, mimicking his walk. Love had crept into the house unnoticed, like a warm draft beneath the door. But winter was not yet done. One morning, Ed awoke to find Caleb curled in Josiah's armchair, shivering. The fire had burned low. The roof groaned under snow. Outside, the sky had gone the color of tarnished silver. They were running low on salt and flour. Josiah looked at the sled, then back at the road. "I'll go," he said. Etta didn't argue, but she packed him an extra scarf and tucked Ellie's drawing into his coat pocket without telling him. "Come back," she said quietly. He nodded. He always did. That night, the fire burned brighter than usual. Ruthie helped stir the stew. Micah read aloud from the Bible, stumbling on the big words. Caleb crawled into Etta's lap, holding a carved horse. And in the space between words and footsteps, between past and present, something unspoken settled among them. Not a promise, not a claim, just a beginning. The wind didn't howl so much as murmur now. It had grown sly, slinking through gaps in the wood, speaking in voices only the lonely understood. It wasn't loud, but it was always there, like a rumor at church or the creak of a noose before it drops. Winter had thickened. The world was white and unforgiving. Even the birds had vanished, leaving only the crunch of boots and the hush of waiting. The children had stopped asking when spring would come. They didn't believe in it anymore. They simply pulled their blankets tighter, helped with chores, and stared into the fire as if it might hold answers. But it wasn't the cold that made Etta restless, it was the silence from town. No more visits, no more knocks, just the knowledge that somewhere behind frosted windows and shuttered mouths, folks were watching, waiting, and judging. The church had stopped sending bread. The pastor hadn't returned. And at the well, folks now filled their buckets before she arrived and left without a glance, as if kindness might stain. Micah, who once ran to the barn without fear, now lingered at the threshold. He stared too long at shadows. His steps grew careful, listening for something only he could hear. Josiah noticed too. At first, he said nothing, but he began locking the cabin door at night, quietly, with purpose. And on the third night of snowfall, Ruthie came in with blood on her lip. "What happened?" Etta asked, voice low but firm. "Nothing that." "Ruthie." The girl shrugged, eyes like slate. "That Whitmore boy threw a stone." Etta knelt. "Why?" Ruthie didn't blink. "Said I ain't supposed to live with colored folks." Josiah was silent for a long moment. Then he stood, went to the wall, and took down his old saber-knot, the rifle. The blade. The one he'd buried under years of peace and prayer. That night, he didn't speak a word, just sat near the fire, sharpening steel while Caleb slept curled at his feet. The next morning, the sheriff arrived. He didn't come with a warrant or a badge that meant anything. He came with his hat in his hand and suspicion in his throat. "Morning, Boone." Josiah didn't invite him in, just leaned against the frame, arms folded. "Got folks saying you're holding children don't belong to you." Josiah said nothing. "You got papers?" "They were alone," Josiah said simply. "That ain't what I asked." "I didn't ask if they were mine when I fed them," Josiah said. "Didn't ask when I carried them through snow or sat up all night, holding one through fever." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Folks talk, Josiah. They always do. They say this ain't right." Josiah met his eye. "But it ain't wrong." That hung in the air between them, thick as wood smoke. After a beat, the sheriff looked away. "I ain't come here to start trouble." "You just brought it with you." He left after that. Said he'd be checking back. But they all knew what it meant. The town had made up its mind. That evening, Etta found Ruthie near the barn, staring up at the darkening sky. "You angry?" Etta asked gently. Ruthie shrugged. "Not at you." "Then who?" Ruthie's hands clenched into fists. "At people who say what's right and what ain't, but don't do nothing when wrong comes knocking." Etta knelt beside her. "That's most folks, baby. They'll quote scripture all morning and ignore suffering by supper. Ruthie looked down. But that don't mean we stopped doing right, Etta said. Ruthie was quiet a long time. Then softly, you think my mama would have come back? Etta swallowed. I think she loved you. That's why she told you to hide. But she didn't come. No, Etta said. She didn't. And Ruthie, fierce and fragile, nodded like she'd already decided never to leave anyone behind again. Inside, Josiah carved another horse. Micah sat beside him, copying each motion with a stick of his own. What are you making? He asked finally. Josiah didn't look up. Home. Micah frowned. That's not what a horse is. Josiah smiled softly. No. Well, when I was your age, home was just a horse that didn't throw you. Micah was quiet then. I like it here. Josiah didn't say it aloud, but the words warmed something in his chest that had been cold for years. He placed the carving in Micah's hand. Then it's yours. The blizzard came without warning. Snow slammed the windows like fists. Wind roared like wolves just beyond the wood. The world vanished. For 3 days, they were buried. The cabin became its own country sealed in white, lit only by fire and faith. They ate sparingly. Etta made games of rationing. Josiah chopped wood with a limp in his knee and a song under his breath. The children clung close, not with fear, but with trust. It was during that storm that Caleb first called Josiah Papa. The boy didn't shout it, just whispered it into the dark, half asleep. But Josiah heard it clear as gospel. He didn't answer, just reached down, tucked the blanket tighter around the child, and stayed kneeling long after Caleb's breath evened out. After the storm broke, Josiah stepped outside into a world reborn. The snow was waist-high. Trees bowed under its weight. The air smelled of nothing but ice and silence. He stood there, feeling the ache in his bones, the echo of things left unsaid. And then he saw it, a shadow, half buried at the edge of the field. He moved toward it, careful, cautious. It was a dog, frozen, curled as if sleeping. No collar, no tracks, just death come quiet. Josiah stared a long time, then turned and went back to the house. The world had a way of forgetting the small things. He didn't intend to be one of them. In the days that followed, they dug paths, shoveled roofs. The routine returned, but something had changed. There was a closeness now, forged in that silence. A knowing. The children stopped asking about the world outside. They looked only to Etta and Josiah for answers. And in return, Josiah began calling them his without hesitation. My boy made that, he said when Micah's carving turned out smooth. My girl found the eggs, he said when Ruthie returned from the coop. It was a quiet claiming, but it was a claiming all the same. Then came the letter, delivered by Reverend Halford, who looked colder than the snow. Etta opened it slowly, her hands shaking. Inside, a woman's handwriting. Neat, curled. A distant aunt, a cousin of the children's mother. Found out from someone in town. Wished to claim the children. Would arrange travel come thaw. Ruthie read it over Etta's shoulder. She said nothing, just turned, went to the fire, and watched it burn for a long time. Then, when no one was looking, she slid the letter into the flame. It curled, blackened, vanished. When Etta noticed, she said only, that wasn't ours to decide. Ruthie looked at her, steady. No, ma'am, she said. It was mine. That night, Etta sat at the table long after the others had gone to sleep. Josiah joined her. Poured tea. Said nothing. They watched the flames. I don't know if we're doing right, she said at last. We're doing what we can, he replied. And she nodded, because sometimes that was the best anyone could do. The cabin, once a shelter, was now a home. Not because of laws, not because of blood, but because of how they held one another in silence. Because of what they'd chosen again and again when no one else would. Outside, the snow whispered secrets to the trees. Inside, the fire burned on. The snow had stopped falling, but winter had not relented. It crouched over the prairie like something waiting, something watching. In the stillness after the blizzard, the cold sank deeper, past skin, past wood, past marrow. Inside the cabin, the fire had dimmed to coals. Josiah rose before the rest, as always. His joints creaked, his breath fogged, but his hands were steady as he packed the small sled with a sack of flour, dried meat, and a few coins wrapped in cloth. The cupboard was nearly bare. "I'll be back before sundown," he told Etta, who had risen silently and tied a scarf around his neck. She nodded, but her fingers lingered at his collar longer than usual. "You see anyone on that road you don't trust," she said, "you turn around." He kissed her forehead. "I know." Then he was gone into white so thick it swallowed him whole. The hours passed. The children played quietly, listening for the creak of the door, the heavy steps, the thump of his boots on the porch. But the light began to change. By late afternoon, the world had dulled to silver again. The storm had not returned, but something else had something worse than wind. An absence. A waiting. When dusk came and Josiah had not returned, Etta wrapped herself in his old coat, tied on her boots, and told Ruthie, "Keep the fire going." Ruthie opened her mouth to argue but saw something in Etta's face that stopped her. She nodded. "We will." Etta left with a lantern, a wool scarf, and a prayer that clenched like a thorn in her chest. She followed the trail north, where the ruts of the sled had begun to disappear beneath shifting drifts. The snow reached her knees, then her thighs. Trees bent around her like watchers, their branches coated in ice, whispering warnings she refused to hear. She walked until the lantern sputtered low. Then she saw Eda's shape in the snow, curled like the dog Josiah buried weeks before. At first, she didn't recognize him. The wind had torn his coat. His hat was gone. Blood stained the snow beneath his temple. Her cry was soundless, caught in her throat. She dropped beside him, cradled his head, whispered his name again and again as if saying it could anchor him to the earth. His eyes fluttered, opened. "Etta," he rasped. She let out a sob, fierce and ragged. "Don't you dare." "Didn't see him coming," he muttered. "3 men. Said I'd stolen what wasn't mine." "Can you walk?" "I'll try." It took everything she had to lift him. She made a sled of her arms and her will, dragging him inch by inch, whispering psalms not for the Lord's ears, but for her own. Her knees bled, her fingers split, but she never stopped. By the time they saw the cabin lantern flickering through the snow, she had lost all sense of time, of weight, of reason. She only knew they were close and that Ruthie was waiting on the porch, Micah behind her, holding Caleb, Ellie in his arms. They rushed out. Together, they pulled Josiah inside. Etta collapsed beside the fire, hands raw, throat torn with cold. Josiah stirred, wincing as they laid him near the heat. "You're home," she whispered. He gripped her hand. "Didn't think I'd get another fire." She pressed her forehead to his. "Then let this one burn long." For 3 days, they nursed him, fed him broth, changed the dressings on his ribs, slept in shifts. The children worked without being asked. Ruthie fetched wood. Micah boiled water. Caleb sat with Josiah and refused to leave his side. They did not cry. They endured. And Josiah lived. When he stood again shaky, but whole, the cabin felt smaller, warmer, like something had shifted between them all. Not fear, not pain, but bond, forged in frost, cemented in blood and love. Weeks passed, and then came the letter. Not one like before. This one came official sealed, signed. From the courthouse 3 counties over. It said guardianship was being reviewed. That formal inquiry would begin in spring. That the children were to be held in place. Until then, Ruthie read it aloud in a voice as cold as the ice outside. "Does that mean they'll take us?" Caleb asked. Etta knelt beside him. "No one's taking anyone." Josiah took the letter, folded it, tossed it into the stove. "We've been reviewed," he said. "What if they come?" Micah asked. Josiah looked at them all as children now, though no paper said so. "They'll come for words, but we've got fire." And fire they had. Spring crept into the corners of things, melting ice at the sill, softening the soil. Birds returned, hesitant and few. But the snow stayed on the high ground, and the wind still tasted of winter. The children had grown taller. Ruthie's face had softened not with weakness, but with peace. Micah carved more than he spoke. Ellie's cough faded with the green returning, and Caleb had learned to laugh again, full and loud, like someone who no longer feared echo. One night, while they sat together after Supernow's storm, no threat, Just Silence. Ruthie rose and walked to Josiah. She carried something in her hand, a small wooden star, carved rough but real. "I made this," she said, and placed it in his palm. Josiah turned it over. "What's it for?" "For putting on the wall," she said, "so people know this house is ours." He looked at her, at Etta, at the others gathered close. Then he nailed it above the door. The wind whistled outside, but no one listened, because inside they had fire and family and a home no storm could carry away.